Bill Cosby is heading back to the courtroom Tuesday. The comedian has a preliminary hearing on charges of criminal sexual assault stemming from a 2004 encounter at his home with a former Temple University employee. The woman has accused Cosby of drugging and molesting her. Cosby says the sex was consensual. Whitney Boan is a criminal defense attorney and joins us from Orlando. Whitney, what can we expect to see in Tuesday's hearing?
Well, we can expect to see a lot of things. What we're definitely going to see is that either way, there's going to be attacks made on this woman's credibility. In terms of the time it took her to report it, she didn't report it for over a year after it allegedly happened. She contacted a civil attorney before she made the report. We're going to hear about how there's a lack of physical evidence. What we don't know yet is whether or not she will actually be there at the hearing. I would anticipate that she probably would be, but we don't know for sure yet. That remains to be seen. Her lawyers have kept quiet. The DA has kept quiet about that. It's going to be an interesting hearing either way.
Whitney, in the unsealed deposition, there are some troubling details from Cosby, including his admission that he obtained drugs to give to women. He also describes several sexual encounters with young women. How does that factor into his case?
Well, obviously, I think that the decision by this DA, although it's come under some fire in terms of political motivation in doing this prosecution and the timing of it with this current DA, I think that that's the crux of their case, honestly. I mean, they have someone who said that this happened, obviously, but they don't have any physical evidence, so they're going to try to use his statements against him. I personally think, as a criminal defense attorney, that some of this is more of an attempt in terms of his statements about having sex with young women, about providing drugs to women in an intent to have sex with them, referencing Quaaludes decades ago, that it's intended to paint him in a bad light to seek a prosecution based upon, he's not a likable guy. He had sex with young women. But I do think that it's fair play for the most part. It's going to probably come in, especially as it relates to the administering drugs to women. And it isn't going to look great for him. I still think there's problems with the case. I think a lot of people think there's problems with this case, however, because of the age of it.
Whitney, as you know, Cosby was arguing that these charges should be thrown out based on a previous agreement with the district attorney. Why did the court overrule that agreement?
Well, for one thing, there was never an agreement made in writing. There was no consideration for that agreement. In other words, something like that might be enforceable if a prosecutor had subpoenaed him pursuant to a criminal investigation, asked him to give statements, and those were the statements that were at issue here. The statements that are at issue here are from a civil deposition from the civil lawsuit a decade or so ago. The statement by the former DA is not binding on this DA in terms of if that DA said, hey, I'm not going to prosecute you, so you should go and you should cooperate with the civil deposition. That has no effect, nor would it ever in any context, whether or not that statement would then not be able to be used against him, or if he couldn't even be prosecuted at this point. There's no law to support it, basically.
There are a lot of inconsistencies in Andrea Constand's story. How can the defense use that to their advantage?
Well, they're going to be able to use it to their advantage in as much as they would in a trial. They're going to be able to use it in the preliminary hearing to show that, this case lacks any meat. It lacks any real substance. And that's not to say that prosecutors should not be able to move forward based upon the statement of a victim. We see this all the time in child molestation cases. Sometimes that's all you're going to have. And as a public policy, I understand prosecutors wanting to be able to do that. But at the same time, that doesn't detract from the weaknesses that they're going to have to overcome in their own case, in that, like I said, she failed to report this for the better period of a year. She'd consulted with her own civil lawyer prior to reporting it. There are inconsistencies in her story. She voluntarily went back to Cosby's house after she alleged this to have even happened and had seemingly, problem-free interactions with him from that point forward. So her motive is definitely going to be at issue here. And the timing of this is going to be an issue here. Like I said, also with the politics of this in terms of why is this DA doing this now if a former DA decided not to do it years ago and decided that the case was weak because of the contradictions in her statements.
What about Cosby's wife, Camille? She had been forced to do a deposition with prosecutors, but refused to answer numerous questions over about 5 hours. Could anything from that deposition be used against Bill Cosby?
I don't think that anything from that deposition could per se be used against Bill Cosby. I think that if Camille testified as a witness in this proceeding, and keep in mind her deposition was given in a proceeding relative to New York, a New York case, not a Pennsylvania case that we're talking about here. It was a separate case. But any prior inconsistent statement by a witness could in theory be used against them if that person testifies. So in other words, if Camille testifies, if Cosby calls her to testify about something and she says something inconsistent with what she said in the New York deposition, it could in theory be used against her. The admissibility of the deposition by Camille just in and of itself against Bill Cosby doesn't seem like something that's going to fly. In other words, I don't think the law supports that just coming in as evidence of anything in and of itself.
All right, Whitney Boan for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.